Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, June 17th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Texas game in 74 days, the game against Michigan in 165 days. If you're planning your next event, make it unforgettable with Grateful Griddle, Columbus's favorite food truck, serving up smash burgers, gourmet sandwiches, and good vibes. Book your catering today at gratefulgriddleoh.com. All right, we're going to be talking about a different kind of vibes on today's show, talking about the vibes for some of the top prospects who are visiting Ohio State last weekend. Got some great information on the huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus. That's Jeremy Birmingham wrote about it. Andrew Ellis here to talk about some of that information, and we're just going to give you some of the stuff. I go to the huddle board to get all the details and everything. But Andrew, I want to start first with a name that was in the Buckeye news cycle just a couple weeks ago that had everyone running around with their hair on fire. Jameer Perez out of Glenville. He committed to Florida just a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. Then he came to Ohio State for camp, and then he came to Ohio State for a visit, and it feels like maybe everyone may have been freaking out just a little bit early on this
Yeah, I think any freak out a couple weeks back when he committed to the Gators was definitely premature. I don't think people expected him, at least the OSU kind of media didn't expect him to be at that camp. And then Berm and some of those guys show up there, and there's the Florida Gator commit just standing there, all 360 pounds of him or whatever. Um, I mean, I think even the people who have followed the Glenville pipeline dating back to when it was really running weren't really freaking out about this when he did commit. So I think getting him on campus was big. Getting him back on campus this weekend for an official visit was, really big. And last week leading up to this weekend, we saw some of the tweets from, Hayes Fawcett, who does a lot of these commitment graphics and stuff like that. And say what you will about the eyeballs and all that stuff. I know we've all got our thoughts on that, but the bottom line is, if you're the guy who's making these graphics for people, you're going to have an idea of what's going on. He sort of hinted at some good news coming for Ohio State, and maybe even two pieces of good news coming for Ohio State. And my personal opinion is that Jameer Perez flipping from Florida could be one of those bits of good news. I know you can't take Twitter bios and stuff like that to heart, but I just got back from work today and I saw the scuttlebutt on the forum about how he took his Florida commitment and his graphic out of his social media profile. And then I make my way to the Florida side, and they're absolutely freaking out about this. So I'm reading the tea leaves here. Maybe he's one of these commitments that could pop anytime this week. Obviously, his teammate Sincere Johnson is set to commit on Thursday. Maybe you get a double dose of Glenville good news that day. But again, 3 stars, but you don't find those body types in the Midwest or in Ohio very often. So getting him is a big deal, I think, if they do.
Yeah, just a space eater in the middle of that defensive line would be it's one of those things where you look at the recruiting rankings and I'm sure people go, yeah, but he's only a 3-star. But yeah, like you said, that's not a body type that you can just, find on every Ohio high school team. So yeah, that could be both a literal and figurative big addition for the Buckeyes. And yes, Sincere Johnson also committing later this week. That's another name that was in that report. You can get the inside information there on Sincere Johnson at the huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So switching from reading the tea leaves on Twitter bios to, do you remember the magic 8 balls where you'd shake it and it'd say yes or no? Or my favorite was always reply hazy, try again. And there is a sort of reply hazy, try again in this among last weekend's visitors. And it is the top interior offensive lineman in the class, Darius Gray, where he visited, and depending on how you want to look at it, it could be still an uphill climb for Ohio State. There could be good news for Ohio State. It just kind of depends on which way you want to look at it.
Yeah, I think I know Berm was semi-optimistic on that one. I don't think I'm quite there. He made a midweek official visit to Ohio State, and those are always a little bit strange, I think. But then he turned right around and went back to the presumptive favorite down in Baton Rouge this past weekend. So I know LSU's gotten the dream school label, and usually if you get the dreaded dream school label, that's not where the kid's going to go. But in this situation, I tend to think that one is still gonna work out in the Tigers' favor. But Tyler Bowen's done a heck of a job since he's been up here. Maybe he can pull a rabbit out of the hat with that one. But my spidey senses are kind of down in the bayou with that one.
All right. And so while we're bumming people out, let's talk about PJ Dean. He was someone that, when Mark and Kevin did their Southern Swing trip just a couple months ago, he was someone who felt like he was trending towards Ohio State. it sounds like maybe that's not the case any longer.
Yeah, it's kind of always been one of those weird situations where he looks like he's kind of between a defensive end and a defensive tackle body type. So that's kind of always been a weird thing that Ohio State would just have to figure out there. And truth be told, I think from what I've been told, they viewed him as kind of a defensive tackle target more than an edge guy. And then I saw some of the pictures of him on his visit, and just based on the looks of those, it looks like a kid who's going to have to add 30 or 40 pounds to play defensive tackle in the Big Ten. And that's not to say this kid's not going to be good in college, because he could go to Georgia or South Carolina or any of those places and be great. But I don't know if, we always see the measurements listed on the profiles for Rivals and On3 and all those places. And it's great to see those. But when these guys come onto campus for an official visit, I mean, Ohio State is taking those measurements themselves. So maybe this was a situation where he's listed at, like 6'5", 255. And maybe he got to Ohio State and he's more like 6'5", 235 or something like that. And you're just like, what's this kid's body going to do? So it's weird to talk about an official visitor who's just was there 2 days ago or a day ago, and it's not the best news in the world, but it doesn't seem like that one's trending in the right direction just based on the post-visit vibes.
All right, so then that means that some of the other defensive linemen who were visiting, and it was a busy weekend for defensive lineman visit, uh, that makes them potentially more important to have them trending in the right direction. And one of the names, there are a couple other names, and again, you can go to the huddle board at huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus at BuckeyeHuddle.com to get all the information. But one of the names that I did want to ask you about was Carter Meadows, because he feels like someone who, okay, if some of the other names we've been talking about over the last few months don't pan out, adding Carter Meadows to this class could be potentially even more important. So how are things trending there?
Yeah, and Tom, it seems like every time we try to talk about Larry Johnson's recruiting, like I feel like I'm just talking myself into circles. I wish we had a magic 8 ball that was just Larry Johnson focused. I think that Carter Meadows, the Washington D.C. edge defender, and Luke Wafel, the edge defender that's looking at USC seriously now, are probably the two top guys for the edge for Larry Johnson. And Wafel was just at USC, and now USC may be the leader, which is always, that's a whole nother conversation as to how they keep doing that. But Carter Meadows, I think he's kind of a guy who maybe handles his recruitment kind of quietly. So there's not really a ton of buzz as to, does Michigan lead? Does Ohio State lead? Does Penn State lead? And he's going to Michigan next week. But, and say what you will about Larry Johnson's recruiting, the DMV and Washington, D.C., that's prime Larry Johnson territory. So this kid, I think, he's 6'6", 225. Like, that's what you look for in an edge defender. The vibes coming out of the weekend seem pretty positive, but he's going to be in Ann Arbor next week. So hold on, I guess. But I mean, if they could get him, that would be that might be the number one guy on the board, regardless of position right now for Ryan Day and the entire staff.
So that'll do it for the defensive line end of things. But we do want to talk just about one cornerback who was in over the weekend. And this is a name that I don't think we've talked about on this show before, Danny Odom. He's a cornerback, and he was, someone who was not necessarily, penciled into the class before the weekend, but it sounds like there was at least some progress there over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking for another cornerback. Some things at that position group haven't exactly gone Tim Walton's way. Elbert Hill's committed to USC, doesn't seem to be wavering on that decision at all. Last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Justice Fitzpatrick, seemingly out of nowhere, committed to Georgia, coming off the official down to Athens. There was some question about whether or not he was going to come up to Ohio State this weekend, and he did not. So with those things at play, I think, Danny Odom's a kid that Ohio State offered not long ago. His name's kind of been blowing up of late. I think everybody had him as a 3-star for a while, and now some of the sites have him as a 4-star, kind of a longer guy. I think, and Berm wrote about this too, Penn State, Nebraska, those are just two of the schools that are in it. Auburn's in it, but he's supposed to be announcing next week, I want to say on the 23rd. And this might be a scenario where Ohio State could maybe benefit from like a delayed announcement, especially since he's visiting Penn State this coming weekend, right before the announcement. So that, I mean, if they could add him to the class, you'd have a 1-2 punch at a cornerback. So, I mean, that's the hope, but he's kind of skyrocketing up the board thanks to some of these other happenings around the country.
So we will be monitoring those and many more recruitments over the coming weeks and days and weeks. This is tends to be commitment season for in recruiting. and we'll probably have some news for you. Probably have some breaking news shows for you as well. Also have the final camp of the summer. They have a 7-on-7 camp on Wednesday, but the final traditional camp setting is on Tuesday. We'll be out there at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center to cover all of that. Should have plenty of interesting insight and analysis. That'll probably be the topic of tomorrow's show, breaking down who we saw, what we learned, and all that kind of stuff for you. But we're headed into the heat of recruiting season, the heat of the summer, and then, boy, we are just about a month away. Holy smokes, just about a month away from Big Ten Media Days. The season right around the corner, even if it doesn't feel like it, which means this would be a great time for you to join us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We got our whole team of insiders covering the team, covering recruiting, covering X's and O's, all to make you a smarter football fan, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.